Hey, okay, this is task 7. So this is part 2 of the Indian modern history video. So in the last video, we talked about how the British had India as a colony and how the Indian elites were sending their kids to Britain and starting to become nationalist. So the British, the Indians who are interested in nationalism created this movement, and they created this political party that they called the Indian National Congress. And they started to think about self-rule. Self-rule is like independence, right? It's like when a country is ruled by the people who live in that country, right? So not ruled by some other country like imperialist country. So India wants self-rule, and they want India to be a democracy, and also they want it to be a modern country. Most of the people who organize the Indian National Congress are Hindu. The most prominent figure you should know is named Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru. I'm not saying his first name correctly. Jawaharlal Nehru, maybe. And Nehru, spoiler alert, goes on to be the first president of India in 1947. So he is a leader in the Indian National Congress. There are other important leaders too. And then there were many Muslims who were worried that because a lot of the people who were in the Indian National Congress were Hindu, they worried that the Muslims wouldn't be fairly represented. So there is another organization that's nationalist developed called the Muslim League, which also wants Indian independence and self-rule. The most important person you should know from the Muslim League is Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Jinnah, spoiler alert, goes on to be the first leader of Pakistan. So the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League, they're fighting for Indian independence, and very often they work together. But in the end, they're not really going to. And the Hindu-Muslim thing in India is interesting. So India is majority Muslim. I'm sorry, India is majority Hindu. But because when the Mughal Empire, when the Muslims invaded India, it was such a long period of time that the Muslims were in charge. So much of India has Hindus and Muslims, living in the same cities and the same neighborhoods. There are Muslims who live throughout India. There are also Buddhists in India, and Jains, and Sikhs, and Christians, and lots of different religions in India. But India is majority Hindu. So a lot of the Indian leaders said, we just want India to be one country, one big country, and we'll get along, and it'll be a democracy, and we'll have freedom of religion, and it's not going to be a problem. And then other people said that's not realistic. We should have a Hindu country and a Muslim country, and so there was that disagreement. But anyway, all of these people basically worked together against the British because the British were occupying India. They had India as a colony. So the main person who's the most important in the Indian independence movement is Mahatma Gandhi. So his name is Mohandas K. Gandhi. And Gandhi became known as Mahatma Gandhi. That's what people called him. Mahatma means great soul. So people would call him Bapu, which means grandpa, or Mahatma, as terms of respect. So even though his name is Mohandas Gandhi, you probably know him as Mahatma Gandhi. And Gandhi was born into an elite family and educated in Britain and became a lawyer. And was very pro-British as a young person. He's very proud of being part of the British Empire and all of the privileges and kind of, status that awarded. But he was working as a lawyer in South Africa, which is a very racially segregated country and where the white minority was oppressing the black majority and also all of the Indian immigrants who lived in South Africa. And he got thrown off a train because he was sitting in like the white, like the first class part of the train, and he was supposed to sit in like the third class part of the train. And kind of galvanized him and made him start to think about inequality. And he started fighting for Indian rights in South Africa with a good deal of success. And so when he comes back to India, he's no longer pro-British Empire. He's pro-Indian independence. And he starts working with the Indian National Congress. Gandhi is a very religious Hindu, and he's also a very, very tolerant and open-minded religious person. And he reads the Bible, and he reads the Quran, and he believes that all religions lead to the same end, and that they're all based on brotherhood and peace and uplifting humanity. So he develops a very particular philosophy called ahimsa, which means nonviolence, based on some traditional Hindu principles of nonviolence. And he decides that India cannot have a violent revolution like the American Revolution or the French Revolution. It can't overthrow Britain through violence. India needs to have a non-violent revolution, because that way India will have the moral upper hand, and it's also just the only ethical way to overthrow oppression is to do it through non-violence. So he has this principle of satyagraha, of civil disobedience, of fighting unjust laws, and standing up for what you believe in, and standing up against oppression, but in a non-violent way. This is probably going to be familiar to you because Dr. Martin Luther King in our country studies Gandhi's teachings and what's happening in India, and models the American civil rights movement on, I think Dr. King said his two main sources of inspiration were Jesus Christ and Mahatma Gandhi, in terms of how he got his inspiration. So when I talk about the Indian independence movement, you'll be like, oh, that reminds me of like the civil rights movement in the United States, and that's not a coincidence. So Gandhi decides that he's going to have give speeches about, this unjust oppression that the Indians are facing. He also is going to lead boycotts of British goods and services. Again, Dr. King will do this in our country, too. He's also going to lead marches across the country. And all of this is to gain publicity for his cause, so that the newspapers and the radios will report on this, and it will spread throughout India, and also spread to Europe and America, all these other places, so that the Indian independence movement against Britain will become popularized, and their kind of world opinion will be thinking about India and looking at India. So, World War I happens, 1914 to 1918. Because India is a British colony, Britain makes its Indian troops fight in World War I. After World War I, a lot of countries do get their independence, but most of the countries that get their independence after World War I are European countries. Most of the non-white parts of the world that are colonies after World War I don't get their independence after World War I. If you remember, Europe put the Middle East under that mandate system. Remember that Blood and Oil video we watched, where all of those countries that thought they were going to get their independence after World War I in the Middle East didn't. So even though a lot of European countries get independence after World War I, India does not. And so Indians really want to have independence. They feel like we fought for you in World War I. We don't have independence. So the nationalists are fighting in a non-violent way with the British. The British pass, one important thing you should know is this thing called the Amritsar Massacre. The British pass a law that say you can't congregate, you can't have a big demonstration and marches and speeches, it's illegal. And a bunch of these people in Amritsar, men, women, children, they gather to do a speech against the British occupation, and they're all gathered to listen to this speech, hundreds and hundreds of people. And the British come in, and there's this particular General Dyer, who orders his troops to open fire on the crowd, and they just kill everybody who is protesting peacefully. This gets international press and turns a lot of world opinion against the British. Gandhi continues to write and boycott. Another important thing that happens is Gandhi starts to speak out against the system of cash crops. So, for example, he says, we, buy our clothes from England. Why can't we make our own clothes? And people start to burn their British clothes, and they start to like sew their own clothes. If you ever look at the modern flag of India, there's like a spinning wheel in the middle of the flag to symbolize like economic independence, that Indians are like making their own clothes from Indian cotton and not buying them from the mother country. So they boycott British cloth and they boycott British goods. Gandhi leads this epic march to the sea, and it's partly televised and it's reported upon, where all hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people are marching day after day after day after day to the sea to make their own salt. It's called the Salt March because the British have a monopoly on salt, and Indians have to buy salt from the British government that's been like approved, manufactured, through the British government, and the Indians are like going to just go to the sea and get the salt. So it's a lot about economic independence. It's also about political independence. It's about Indians wanting to run their own government, run their own economy, get rid of mercantilism, get rid of any British occupation. There are, throughout all of this, is this theme of nonviolence. So if a British officer shoots an Indian protester, in the leg, the Indian protester is supposed to not do anything, just continue to speak out against oppression, but not fight back. There's no fighting back. And there are a couple of times where India erupts into violence, and Gandhi does a hunger fast until the country calms down and stops being violent. So he does these hunger strikes to try to convince people to continue to be nonviolent. Okay, that's going to be the end of number 6. I'll give you one more where we talk about the actual independence of India and what India is like today.